it's Skorikowski, and today we're going to talk about campaigns. Now, one comment that I've gotten on various videos or seen on different online communities goes something like this. I'd love to be a game master, but I just can't come up with some giant story arc for a campaign, followed by some lamenting and how they can't be a game master. Now, that's obviously not a direct quote, but essentially what it's saying is that there's prospective game masters that are intimidated out of starting to become game masters because they first believe that they have to have some sort of giant, elaborate plot in order to do it. And I admit, when I first came across this sentiment, it puzzled me at first. But as I dug deeper and started kind of reading different forums or interacting with people trying to answer their questions, I realized that many players, usually newer ones, believe that there's only one way to properly do a campaign, and that's with a giant saga, which that's not the case at all. Now, because certain terms do get thrown around a lot in different RPGs, and whenever I say the word campaign, that might mean something different to you, and in order to kind of clear up any confusion before we have that of people not understanding what I mean when I use certain terms, let's go ahead and define what it is I mean when I use the term campaign for a tabletop role-playing game. I tried looking it up, and I found that none of the real definitions for it really worked for me. Either they were one too limiting, only really talking about one type of campaign it can be, or they were just so broad and vague because they were trying to cover all the different aspects that could be called a tabletop role-playing game. So when I say campaign, what I mean is a series of connected adventures following the player characters across multiple sessions. Maybe the connection is a large storyline, maybe the connection is the setting, maybe it's simply just the heroes themselves. These are different than one or two shot scenarios where the heroes do a single adventure and then their careers are done. But even with that sort of vague definition, there's still a lot of exceptions to that. People have done campaigns that span editions or systems or entire generations of player characters. For example, Ripples from Carcosa is a campaign that looks like three separate, unrelated one-shot adventures, each with different characters and taking place in a different millennium, but together they form a story that the players can see once they look at all three of them together. So, since so many different things could be called a campaign in tabletop gaming, and there's more exceptions than rules than there really are when it comes to anything tabletop gaming, let's go ahead and stick to the vague definition that a campaign takes place over multiple sessions, spanning months or even years. In short, it's a long-term game versus games. Well, that's as clear as mud. White Wolf evidently calls theirs Chronicles, and I like that name a lot better than Campaigns. It just has a better ring to it. Campaigns sounds so military, and I think that's just a holdover from Dungeons & Dragons wargaming roots. However, Chronicles, while it does sound better, doesn't roll off the tongue as well as Campaign does, so I'm just going to stick to using Campaign. Anyway, while there are a lot of different ways we could do a campaign in a tabletop role-playing game, for the purpose of this video, I'm only going to talk about the two biggest categories, the Saga and the Episodic. And then we'll discuss some of that gray zone middle area that happens between the two. So we're going to talk about a lot more than just two in this video, but shh, we'll get to that. Both of these have potential strengths and weaknesses, but neither of them is better than the other one. They're just simply different than one another. And none of this is going to be hard and fast rules or absolutes, just simply higher potentials and likelihoods, but nothing definite. So let's begin with sagas. Sagas are what's in vogue right now. These are large narratives that can take months or even years to unfold, where the characters spend their adventuring careers or a significant portion of their adventuring careers following a single quest or objective. And while I can't say for sure, there's two reasons that I believe why so many players believe that sagas are the only way to do a campaign. First is the publishers, most specifically Dungeons & Dragons. With 5th edition, D&D decided that instead of publishing a bunch of smaller modules like previous editions had, instead they'd publish large hardback campaign books, and they have got several of these things. Because D&D is 1, the most popular role-playing game out there, and 2 is the most common gateway that introduces new players to the whole world of tabletop gaming, a lot of people see these elaborate, very long campaign adventures and they believe, oh, well, no, that's just what a campaign is. And D&D is hardly the only game out there that does this. Call of Cthulhu, for example, which is my preferred role-playing game, has a lot of different campaigns out there, such as Tatters of the King or Horror on the Orient Express. Seriously, look at this thing. It is a beast, and one day I'll finally get to run it. And the only one of their campaigns that I have been able to run is Two-Headed Serpent for Pulp Cthulhu. And that's now a 9-part review / war story series that you should totally check out if you haven't seen it. And Traveler is the Pirates of Drinax campaign, which is another very formidable campaign. And these are just the campaigns that I have in the room with me right now. A lot of different publishers have them for a lot of different games of just big pre-written sagas. They are extremely popular. So it stands to reason that a lot of gamers see these published works and they think that that's just what a campaign is. One giant story arc, even if it itself is comprised of different chapters or different adventures. The other reason that I think there's a lot of confusion about what a campaign is and a lot of people thinking that they're all sagas has to do with all the different game stream shows that are out there, and those are extremely popular, and most of them use a big saga technique where we've got one great story where every week we get to check in and see what our heroes are doing and how the plot is moving along. And there's two reasons why those people do those sort of games. One, that's probably what those players prefer playing, so that's what they're going to be streaming. And two, sagas make for great television. Sagas do have a lot of definite pluses, but they have some areas that could be potential problem areas. On the good side, they work great for getting players to feel involved in a large world setting. Political games can thrive in a saga campaign. So if your setting involves a large, detailed world, sagas can work very well for that. Also, because sagas have such a large story with the central tension that, hopefully your players are going to get invested in, they have that added encouragement that your players are more likely to make time for that next session, so they can see what happens next in the story. However, sagas do have some potential drawbacks as well. Not definite problems, but some definite potential areas that game masters will want to look out for and best to avoid them. First, they can be intimidating. Whether you're making it yourself or using a pre-written one, because sagas have such a large story arc, they can be a lot of work. And that can frighten a lot of people out from even beginning such endeavors, which is the whole reason we even started this video to begin with. Next, they can be a long-term commitment. Is this story, the world, the themes, or characters something that will keep your interest for the entire time that it takes to complete it? One of the reasons that a lot of saga campaigns out there fail or just fizzle out is because what sounded very, very exciting at first ends up not keeping everyone's attention the way that they had hoped it would. Once we've had a few sessions in and the shine begins to fade off of it, and then the campaign just kind of ends. Next is unintentional plot armor. If you and your players have spent months or even years following the paths of these characters and you're getting closer to the end, the idea of losing one of them can become pretty frightening. It would be a shame if a few bad dice rolls or a few bad character decisions might cause one of them to die or somehow be taken permanently out of the game as a result. And now the campaign and all that time that you spent trying to build up near this end has been completely ruined, so you start taking it a little easy on your players because you want to keep these characters intact for the big ending. The problem becomes that once the players realize that there's plot armor, even if they might appreciate the fact that you were able to keep their character alive a little bit longer than they probably should have, their enjoyment in their own accomplishments becomes lessened as a result because now they know that they might not have fully earned what they get in the end. Or in some cases, some players might just start acting recklessly because they know that there's no real consequences because they have this plot armor. Okay, that is it for sagas. Now let's flip over the other type, episodic campaigns. These campaigns follow the player characters as they go through multiple and possibly unrelated adventures. They might have common themes or common settings, but they don't have the long, singular plot that a saga has. Star Trek is a great example of an episodic. The heroes are on a ship, and they have more of an adventure of the week style adventures than they were doing if they were having a single plot carrying them out through the whole thing. If you miss an episode of Star Trek, it's no big deal. You might catch the one after that, and it's not like you really missed anything. You might have some repeat characters that pop up from time to time, or a couple issues with continuity, such as when Chekhov showed up that one season and then Chekhov was just always around after that, so there is a bit of a continuity, but you don't need to see every single episode in order to know what's going on. Or like in MacGyver, it was all episodic, but then Murdoch would pop up every now and then to cause trouble, and he'd come complete with new scars from the last time he crossed MacGyver's path.
MacGyver? Seriously, brother, you are dating yourself with that one.
What? MacGyver is cool.
Have you even seen it recently?
No, but I remember it being pretty cool.
Sorry, dude, but MacGyver isn't as cool as you remember it being back in the day. Also, while you're at it, it's probably best that you avoid rewatching Knight Rider.
Oh, damn. Also, detective games thrive for episodic, where every week the player characters get a new and exciting case to solve. And while I haven't done some sort of official poll with all the different RPG campaigns out there, as popular as sagas are and as big a deal as everybody makes about them, I'd be willing to bet that the majority of campaigns that are going on out there are actually some variation of an episodic campaign. They have several perks, one of which being exploring our options. New players, either new to the system or just new to role-playing games in general, are presented with a ton of choices. Not just choices like what class or what race that they want to play, but different themes and different settings and all the different things that we can have in a tabletop role-playing game. Episodic campaigns that don't require some sort of long-term commitment to a single story or this particular group of characters makes it easier to try out different things without damaging the overall continuity and flow of the entire game if we could just kind of swap out different aspects from time to time. You make a character you're not that into, introduce your next character once they reach the next town or adventure location. You decide you don't like the setting as much as you thought you would when you first started the whole thing? Well, then the next adventure whisks the heroes away to a new and exciting setting that hopefully they can enjoy a little bit more. They're easier to feed you what you're in the mood for at the moment. So, if one day one of your players says to you,
"So last week I was binging all those old mummy movies. The Brendan Fraser one's not that crappy Tom Cruise one. And I was thinking that would be a really cool place to do a game, like deserts and mummies and scarabs and that sort of thing."
So the next adventure sends the heroes off to the desert where they got to have all the exciting things that player wanted. And then another player says to you,
"I'd like to do some sort of ice setting sometime, like white dragons or maybe orcs riding around on polar bears. That would be awesome."
So shortly after that, we end up in an ice environment. We get to have orcs riding polar bears or whatever it was that the player wanted. The lack of being committed to a very large story gives a lot of freedom to try out new things and be able to feed the desires of what you want to play when you want to play it. Another comment that I've gotten several times goes something like this. "Hey Seth, I'm really happy that you showed us Call of Cthulhu and my players and I are wanting to start a game of it." And I'm always like, "Great, I'm really happy that other people are trying out Call of Cthulhu." And then they go on to say, "Yeah, we're going to start it off by playing Massive Nyarlathotep, which should take us 2 years to finish this campaign." At which point I kind of wince at that. I mean, these players don't even know what it is that they like yet. They haven't actually test-driven it. They haven't been able to see what aspects they prefer and which ones they might not like as much. So I always think to myself, well, you probably should do a few different episodes, try a few different games and themes out, and then once you know what you like, then you could either take those characters that you've been doing episodes with and move them into a giant saga campaign, or make new characters and have those start the saga campaign, but maybe that's just me. While episodic certainly can allow you to explore a larger world, because the player characters aren't necessarily tied to one location because there was a plot that was there and now they have to wait until that plot has played itself out, episodics don't also necessarily require a detailed world. You can certainly have one if you want, but there's nothing wrong with having a full, beautiful, detailed world. I've done it before, but while sagas might require that you have a lot of details about where the plot is taking place, episodics are pretty good about playing it loose. If your characters start off in a dinky little town or even in a major metropolitan city, that's all that you need in order to have the game. You don't have to know what's on the other side of the next hill until the adventure takes them there. Maybe you do have a larger world out there, but maybe not. It doesn't really matter for the particular game that you're playing. In my experience, I usually do it where I do have a detailed world out there, but the player characters are usually located in some sort of port city. This is Stoneford. I've used various incarnations of this place in various fantasy campaigns for many years now. If we want, the player characters can explore all the intricacies of the world that I've made, but they're also just as likely to hop on a ship and head off to some faraway land with new and exciting backdrops that are not on the map that I made. We just kind of play it all by whatever our mood is. On the flip side of all this is that the players might not get as deeply invested in the world if they're always traveling around, but again, like everything else, it really depends on the specifics of your campaign. Another area where episodics can do very well is when you're dealing with sporadic attendance. If you have a group of, let's say, 4 players, but due to work and school and family and everything else, you can only ever manage to get 2 to 3 players at any one time. In a saga where you've got some sort of huge plot, that can be a problem. But here, if you know you're going to be short a couple players and you don't have some sort of large plot where you have to figure out how we're going to explain the fact we've suddenly only got 2 people, or we designed this whole thing where it was supposed to have 5, but now we only have 3, you can just redo an adventure very quickly. For that particular episode, you only need the specific players that you have for it, rather than wishing that you had all these other players that you wanted when you wrote the adventure. But on the flip side to that, while sagas are great at getting players invested in the game plot because they want to see what happens next, encouraging them to come to each and every game because they're invested in that big plot, that can be a little bit trickier to do in an episodic where missing a session really isn't going to hurt the overall game itself, so it is give and take. Another possible issue that you might face with episodics is players feeling less consequences for their actions. If they burn down the town or screw something up, it might not matter as much to them because the next session they're going to be off to a new town or new location anyway. This could also mean that murder hobos might be able to flourish here because they don't have to face the consequences for whatever actions they do. But at the same time, their screw-ups or whatever it is they do are also less likely to destroy the entire game because you're doing episodic. You can probably easily move it to a different location, but definitely be warned, the lack of consequences can be problematic for some players. Okay, so we've talked about the 2 different types of campaigns that we can do and the different possible benefits and hindrances they have, but let's now talk about that big gray zone that appears in the middle with blended campaigns. I'd mentioned earlier you can start a campaign off by being episodic, and then once everybody's kind of got their footing ready and they know what they like, you can then step foot inside of a saga campaign from there, and there's no problem in doing it that way where one transitions to the other. But another method you could do is what I call the bookend. With these, you start the campaign off by introducing what the overall plot is, the big evil bad guy, what the overall objective is, and then you follow that up with an episodic campaign where they might do a lot of just different and possibly unrelated adventures, and then once everybody is ready and the game master is ready to do it, you then end off the campaign by bringing back the other bookend, and you kind of wrap up what the entire plot of it is. A great example of this would be the old television show The Fugitive. In that, our hero is framed for murder and is on a quest to find the one-armed man and avoid the law from capturing him. But along the way, he also has all sorts of unrelated adventures. Occasionally, a character shows up from his past to push the overall plot along, but usually not. This thing ran for 120 episodes, and the villains, the one-armed man and the chasing detective, only appeared in about a third of those adventures. The rest of the time, it was just adventure of the week until the big series finale. But from a player's point of view, if that was a campaign, they would see that as a saga because you do have an entire plot thread that went through it. But from a game master's point of view, it's mostly episodic. Another version you can try, and I didn't find a really good name out there for it, so I'm just going to call it the 5 Glowing Gems. I have done a lot of these. This is actually my preferred style. Essentially, at the beginning of the campaign, the heroes get the goal, kill the evil villain, save the nation, free the imprisoned god, or whatever else the plot might be. The heroes know what the objective is very early on. However, in order to achieve this goal, and they know what that goal is, they must first collect several items that are scattered around the nation, or around the world, or around the multiverse. And these are items that gathered together as something that can be used to open the portal, or cast the spell, or open the Citadel's magic gates, something they need in order to finish the campaign. These items could be anything you want them to be. Puzzle pieces, lost scrolls. I once did it where there were these kind of weird magical daggers that they had to stick in these different slots. That was kind of fun. And it could be any number you want. I'm just using the name 5 because I like the ring of it. So you could have it be 3 or you could have it be a dozen. It's just some sort of MacGuffin that the player characters have to gather in order to finish the overall objective. So at the beginning of the campaign, you tell them what the overall goal is. You tell them that they need to gather the items. And then you say, well, we don't know where they all are, but we know where 1 or 2 of them are, so the player characters go after those at first. So the heroes go out, they have their adventure fetching these 1 or 2 items that they know where they are, and at the end of those adventures, maybe they discover some sort of clue that tells them where the next item is, or they just get the item, they return to their home base of operations, and their patron or their sage or whoever it is says, well, we found another one, and they tell the heroes where it is, and now the heroes go racing off to a new exciting backdrop somewhere somewhere but to fetch the next item that can push the campaign along. Now you as a game master, you don't have to know where all these items are at the beginning of the campaign. You can figure that out as you get to them. All you need to know is how many of them there are and where the next one is going to be. Again, this gives the players the feeling of a saga because each and every adventure they get a new item and that pushes the overall objective along. It kind of pushes the plot in the direction that they want it to go. But from your point of view, it's also an episodic because you can kind of feed the need of whatever it is you're in the mood for, or try different things out like that, or you don't have to commit up front exactly what the entire plot of the entire thing is. You just know that you've got a beginning and an end, and along the way they're going to have so many adventures to get so many items in order to get to the end. So, in conclusion, there are a lot of different ways that you can approach a campaign in a tabletop game. It doesn't just have to be one single way to do it, and none of them are necessarily the right way to do it. It really just depends on what sort of mood or what it is you're in the mood for. So if one of them doesn't work that well for you or you find it intimidating, that's fine. You can try a different one or mix it up and try something a little different than you normally try, because as long as you and your players are having fun with it, then you're doing it the right way.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews and tabletop philosophies, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, amigos, you have a great day.